Hi everybody, this is Martina. Today, as I was announcing, we will be talking to two dear ladies. On my right side, this is Dr. Elena. She's a psychotherapist from a very reputable clinic in London, and she's my personal therapist. Happens to be that she is herself Ukrainian from Skadovsk. On my left is a friend, Viktoriya. Viktoriya is actually from Mariupol and she has family there. And we just received really great news that she found out that her dad is alive and okay. How has it been for you experiencing firsthand? There's no actual words to describe what is happening in Mariupol.
Do I need to share my emotions? I mean, I don't live in the city for the last at least 15 years. And I cannot say that I have emotional attachment to the city, but I have emotional attachment to the people.
Precisely.
And it's the people that make
of course,
the country.
It's the people, and most of my friends were still there. All of my family were still there, starting with grandparents, and it was my father and my brother and my nephew, so they were all there. And they were not expecting these heavy bombings or anything what happened. It was absolutely surprise. And the problem for them, it was that in 2014, they had experienced already some bombings around the city, and in 2014, my grandparents in particular lost their house. It was bombed and burned. In 2014, when people heard first bombings, they were collecting their suitcases and leaving the city. But after a couple of days, nothing happened. And that was the biggest problem in 2022, because people were not thinking that something big could happen, as they already been through it, and
they have a false sense of security.
Exactly. So they were thinking, okay, they will shoot around and then it will be gone as always. But it wasn't. And the biggest problem I think that they experienced, that they were not having these documents ready to leave anytime. So they lost a lot of valuables, documents, clothes, things that they were attached to, like something small but very valuable, so they were not able to take it. Yes, and they basically went to the bomb shelter for 1 day, and they stayed in there for 24 days in the same clothes, without water, electricity, gas, anything. We didn't know what happened. So the only thing we could know from the news that there are a lot of dead bodies around, and that we don't know if our loved ones survived, or like even my friends or my family members. Of course, it's clear, but also my classmates, like starting with the close classmates, ending with somebody further. And I knew that there is some houses were bombed where my friends were living, and it was just devastating. And every time I would call to somebody who were having some connections, relatives in Mariupol, and the only thing that we had is hope. That's it. We didn't have any, at least we could check if they're alive or anything, and we still don't.
And that's how it is for hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, in 2014, you were working directly with, should I say, victims or survivors, heroes?
Yes, victims, survivors, heroes, all of it, yes. I suppose when we look at trauma as a psychological phenomenon and how it affects us, it completely disrupts our view, our sense of a smooth narrative. So when we look back, everything is disjointed. Events, feelings, emotions. And when we try to sort of put it back together, we're really struggling with that. Why? Because we can't reason. The event is so powerful in its destructive nature that we simply do not have cognitive capacity, we simply do not have emotional capacity to recognize, to name, and to own those feelings. Because our unconscious mind, that's how it protects us. For example, when we speak to people, when I speak to my friends or colleagues in Ukraine now, and I ask them who are sheltering, who are in hiding in basements with their children and partners, and I ask them, how are you? And you get really emotional because you worry it's really staggering, the cool they maintain. And they tell
Incredible.
me, Lena, don't go hysterical. Don't worry. We are fine. So you don't really comprehend how can they be like that. Well, this is called trauma denial. They're not delusional, of course. It's a very sophisticated way of our psyche, of our unconscious mind, to protect us when we are right in the midst of it all. It's a survival mechanism, because otherwise we won't be able to make it, because there's too much at stake.
I think you've explained it so well, and I think it's so important to have this explanation from a professional person. I was having a conversation with two young girls from Kharkiv, and their father and their young brother and mom, and it was incredible. He's explaining to us, oh yes, they just bombed this and this, and we found a tomato seed, so we can have tomatoes in our garden when time comes. And you're thinking you must be absolutely delusional, but you have now explained that it's actually a sophisticated mechanism of coping.
Yeah, and self-protection. Well, at the initial stage, obviously, when we are right in the thick of it.
I wanted to add something.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2014, when they just started to bomb areas around Mariupol, a lot of my friends said that they were just packing everything and leaving with the cars.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly, this stress levels goes down,
Mm-hmm.
and then people just drinking beer and looking at the bombings somewhere in front, and they are just getting used to everything. So it was so incredible. Also,
it's surreal, isn't it? It is completely and utterly surreal. It's interesting you were saying that when you managed to see your aunt and you brought them to safety, when they talk about these experiences being in a safe place, well, first of all, it's great that they're willing to talk as opposed to them being completely withdrawn and completely numb, because going into a freeze response to trauma, which is one of the basic responses, is quite a kind of standard go-to strategy. So it's great that she's able to talk about it, but you were saying that she tends to repeat the same story again and again and again, which again is a typical symptomatology of post-traumatic stress disorder. So a few people and clients, those who are at the receiving end of that, as yourself, are asking, so what do I do with that? Well, number one, it's just really important to give them space to be and to tell their story. By telling their story multiple times, they're actually trying to make sense of what happened. Because again, if we go back to what trauma is, human beings are creatures of meaning. We need to make sense with what's going on, otherwise we are unable to function properly as being human per se. And with the trauma, it completely annihilates our ability to reason with what happened, because it's too horrendous. There are no words to describe it. We can only feel it. And how do we feel the horror? We feel it on a visceral level. We feel it literally in our stomach. We feel it in our chest. We hyperventilate and all of it. So when they're trying to tell their story, layer after layer after layer, just provide this space for them to be with their story, however difficult it is, and help them to get reconnected with their feelings, because we may sense through language. So that would be the first and foremost what we can do for them. Just be there for them, to witness their sorrow, to witness all of it, whatever they bring in. It's incredibly, incredibly difficult. And in psychotherapy, we call it being a holding space as opposed to healing space. Healing space will come later when they start seeking psychological help, when they start doing all other things. But that's kind of the initial what we can do for them, really.
How can we help Ukrainian people to be patient with the ignorance that they are experiencing? because I'm realizing that for people who haven't been through it, they simply cannot understand. What are some tips that we can give to Ukrainian women carrying all this luggage of trauma, and they now need to suddenly function in a society that's completely unaffected by war?
I think it would be slightly patronizing if we start giving advice to Ukrainian women. And I don't want to kind of sound unhelpful, but with what they've been to, yes, on the other hand, they do need a lot of practical advice in terms of how to get adjusted to this way of life, which it could be quite different and difficult. All we can say is, well, number one, be an agent of your own survival after you've been through the worst. Be proactive, because actually this is healing. This is therapeutic. It's instrumental for your recovery. Get in touch with whoever you can who is capable to offer help. If you are not able, then talk to a friend, talk to somebody else who has traveled with you, and ask for help. Trauma immobilizes you. You feel hopeless. You feel helpless. But try to reconnect. Try again. Because what is resilience? How do we build resilience? And of course, they do need a lot of resilience to survive through this incredibly challenging and dehumanizing time. But going back to resilience bit is that there's been recently a very interesting article in the Journal of Neuroscience. So how do we build it? We try, and we try really hard. We take a break and we try again. It's a process. It's not an outcome. And yes, I mean, they do need to try really hard. And it pains me saying that, giving them advice in my position. But we do need to help each other. We do need to try and listen to each other. We need to try and be out there for each other. So they really need to try to be the agent of their own survival when they make it to safety. And of course, there will be a lot of situations which they find disappointing, but we shouldn't stop trying.
Understood that there's a very also a healthy tribal sense of
community.
Yes, and this brings about security and also trust in each other, and then slowly it seems that
it brings a sense of normality. Right. I'm not alone. Yes, as John Donne said, no man is an island. And this is huge to their healing. Well, because the opposite of depression is connection. Connection of any sort. Connection with like-minded people, connection with nature, connection with animals. There's been so many wonderful stories of survival and escape, and this wonderful photos of people in Irpin crossing the well, it wasn't even a bridge, it was a makeshift bridge, something, carrying a huge, I think, Labrador, like really huge dog, their family pet. And well, this is a part of connection. We can't leave the dog behind. Again, going back to treating trauma, what trauma does to us, it disrupts our natural sense of reason. So to restore it, we need to try and engage in anything which brings us this sense of reason. For example, community choir, singing together, music, or drumming, or martial arts. If we look at 9/11 in the US, after the aftermath of it, 2 years after, I think, the American Psychological Association did a huge research with regards to what helped the survivors of the aftermath, what helped them to heal psychologically. And of course, naturally, all the shrinks of New York were expecting that number one, it will be psychotherapy. No, it wasn't. So number one was acupuncture. Number two was yoga, and Viktoriya is a yoga instructor. Number three was, I forgot what it was, but well, therapy was number four.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And just to reinforce the point of connection and realism, one of the leading experts in treating trauma, Dr. Kolk, comes with this idea of rhythm. And he gives wonderful examples of that trauma treatment should be holistic. So it's not just therapy, it's not just medication. It's doing all those things, reconnecting your wounded self with the rest of the world when you are ready, on your own terms, at your own space. But to start with, going back to my initial point, what we should do is provide a holding space. Provide a space where we just bear witness to their suffering, where we just bear witness to their story, and we help them to tell their story just by being with them, looking at them, listening to them, giving a hug if they want to. Because, for example, survivors of abuse and rape, they may be very, very kind of hyper-vigilant and very much against of any physical closeness. So just being attuned in what it's like for me, whether I'm a therapist or whether I am the host of that family, what is it like for me to be with these people in the room and try to relate to them like that? What is it like to be with them in here and now? And sometimes it's just offering, a cup of tea and listening and being empathetic.
So many women who were escaping told us that, and some that I personally, picked up from the train stations and so on. And then at the train station, they're looking at what is happening in their own city. Notably Mariupol and Kharkiv, beyond any other cities, in my experience. And women say that they were in the survival instinct. And this is on repeat every day. We are hearing these stories. The ground is shaking. You attempt to go for water. You don't know if you will come back. You are seeing death all around you. And only weeks later, once when you are back in the normal world, you start realizing that you can now release. Mm-hmm. And then, almost like a puzzle, they tell us one thing and it's unconnected. Then suddenly, a couple of days later, another thing. And then once when you have the whole puzzle, this is when most of women release, and then they either cry or, and that's a healthy also way for them, I think, to just let it go.
And the interesting fact, actually, when my family got out, I was the one telling them what is going on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because they were completely cut off the whole world, and even the first question that they ask, if like this and this, are we already winning? What is going on? Are we going to get our city back? And I was like, oh my God.
Well, that's the hardest thing for them to accept later, isn't it? That's what happened to the city.
Yeah, it's not temporary.
It's not temporary.
Yes, because again, for them, 2014 is again and again where they were able to get rid of the attack of Russians and just push them back and to hold their city. So they spent this 8 years in order to create maximum out of the city on the Azov Sea, and they were rebuilding it. They made such a beautiful city out of it, And now for them just to accept that they do not belong there anymore, their roots are out and they are not planted anywhere because of the situation and instability, and that's the hardest. And I think, again, my aunt and my uncle right now in a safe place, but still what they do, they are checking the news every day. And I think for them it is now the same.
It's important.
The way to connect.
It's the connection, precisely.
With the country.
That's the connection.
Yes.
Yeah.